And welcome back. And as promised before the break, we're sitting down to have a conversation about business process outsourcing, or BPO. And of course, this is a spin-off of what happened at the summit yesterday. And joining us for this conversation, we have Estela Arriara, trade advisor from the Commonwealth Secretariat. We have Trevor Killen, senior investment consultant from the British Commonwealth, OCO Global, and we'll get to learn a little bit more about that company. And we also have the acting manager from Belize Invest, which comes out of Beltraide, Hiro Balani. Good morning and welcome to the show.
Good morning.
Good
morning.
Now, let's start off by first defining what exactly is business process outsourcing and why this has become such an important issue that it actually led to a summit.
Sure. Well, as you know, William, this industry started off in Belize since 2005. We often tend to call it the contact call center industry, but the proper terminology as well is BPO. We've been using that over and over in the media to get that out. However, essentially, business process outsourcing is simply when a company outsources a portion of its services to a country like Belize. And so we've been competing in the nearshore market and to win services. And so essentially it's how we can do back office work for major US companies, which we are already doing. And again, a part of this project with the Commonwealth Secretariat is to see how we can strengthen the sector even further by doing more value added work and also by developing standards. And so BPO, that's essentially what the term really means, is business process outsourcing.
Now, when you look at this, because it's an emerging thing in terms of how fast is it evolving, and why is it such an important consideration? Is it the wave of the future?
BPO is a huge industry globally. I've been involved with it for around 30 years in different parts of the world, and it's grown and grown throughout all that time. But it's differentiated. There is onshore, where you do the work in your own country. There is offshore, where it can be outsourced to pretty much anywhere, and nearshore, where it's closer to the home market. And one of the things that is really differentiated BPO in the last 5 to 10 years is the growing realization that you must have people answering calls and dealing with stuff that are culturally well attuned to your customers. And this is the great strength of Belize, because particularly with the US market, Belize's native English speakers, cultural affinity, and natural friendliness makes it a big plus for servicing customers in the US market.
Now, in terms of what happens, you're raising some very good points, and you made some differentiation between near and offshore and onshore. Didn't know that existed, but what's the benefit of going into either one of those streams? Is it decided by geography, for example? Simply that becomes, I guess, nearshore in some cases?
It's decided by business economics generally. Obviously, all things being equal, it's easier for a company to have business process outsourcing in its own country. But if you have other opportunities, India, Philippines, Belize, that can offer the same service at a more competitive price, then that's a driver to place business offshore or nearshore. But cost is not the only factor. It has to be combined with a good quality of customer service, offering an overall value for money proposition, and that's becoming increasingly important in the industry.
You said something just now that has triggered something in my mind's eye, because it can happen within the country itself.
Oh yes, a lot of BPO is not necessarily outsourced beyond, say, the US or the UK or whatever. It depends on the application, and often there's a blend where some parts of the application are outsourced to an overseas country and some are retained within the country itself. So it depends what's trying to be achieved and who can do what best.
Interesting. Now, Estella, let's talk a little bit about why this is one of the things that has caught the attention of the Commonwealth Secretariat.
There's two main things I could point out. One is that nowadays it's becoming more and more difficult for people to move from, let's say, a developing country to a developed country in order to get jobs. But with BPO, we know that the service can be offered while the service provider remains in their country. So they're able to provide the service without actually having to move to the country where the service is being demanded. So we've seen that that's a huge, huge plus for the BPO sector. Secondly, we've seen that around the Commonwealth, it provides opportunities for people that would otherwise be out of work. It provides opportunities for young people, women, people are able to work part-time. They don't have to be, let's say, they don't have to have the very high skills. They just need to be able to have basic computer skills, be able to communicate. And this is a layer of the population that in many developing countries is out of work. So when they have an opportunity to provide, let's say, to take calls on behalf of a company that's outside of the country, they're able to get jobs, they're able to, feed their children, they're able to go back to school, and they're able to carry on their lives with this opportunity that BPO provides. So those are the two main things that we are seeing in many developing countries. We see that for many of them, we've got, because people have gone to school, but the local economy is just not able to provide the jobs that are needed. So BPO fills this gap in a way that is sustainable.
Now, I want to pull back to one of the things that Hero said very early on. How do you regulate this kind of industry? Because I know within Belize, we've had a flurry of call centers, and there's always, varying reports coming out about, the work conditions, how stringent they are, etc. And while it may not be a sweatshop kind of reality, for some people it's pretty close in terms of how stringent the rules are, and the working hours can be very taxing. And in some cases, you spoke about flexibility just now, but in some cases it's anything but flexible. So let's talk a little bit about that, and how can you move to really regulating it to make it meet the standards of the local labor agencies that you may have, and to make sure that local laws are not violated in the process as well, in looking at opportunities that you don't wreck human rights, so to speak.
Do you want to speak on that?
Yeah, this is one of the things, I can start off. This is one of the things that came out of the summit yesterday. And we are grappling with two main things. First of all, there is a tendency for governments to over-regulate. When you see a business that has grown the way the BPO sector has grown in Belize, out of the initiative of the private sector, sometimes government comes on, heaps regulations on them, with the result that the sector doesn't grow as fast as it can. The other end of the coin is where they just leave it with no regulation whatsoever. So what we have discussed yesterday was a blend between statutory regulation and voluntary regulation. So there are certain things that government has to regulate. There are certain standards that have to be put in place, standards about the facility itself, standards about working conditions, health and safety, and so on. But then there are others that the industry itself has to put in place, things about how they should respond to calls, working hours, and so on and so forth. So what we are proposing for Belize is a blend of both. So the Bureau of Standards was there, and we'll be taking the lead in trying to define, helping to define the statutory standards that have to be in place. And we are also calling upon the BPO sector, and they took this up very well yesterday, to form an association that will help to determine the regulations that have to be followed voluntarily.
regulation is only part of the story, because what really drives standards and value added, and Belize is making significant efforts to improve the value added in the delivery of BPO, is the business dynamics, because you're responding to your customers' requirements and they're responding to their customers' requirements. The kind of standards that will need to be there are going to be insisted upon by the US company that's placing the contract with the company in Belize, and that in turn will be driven by what their customers expect. And one of the big changes that's happening is that some young people in Belize have seen BPO as a temporary job, as a fill-in job. But that's not really true if you look at it in a global sense. And increasingly, we are encouraging young people in Belize to see BPO not as a temporary job for a few months, but as a career opportunity that can open up much wider horizons.
Is that due to the fact that primarily we've had low entry in terms of the skill sets necessary to actually participate in the BPO market in Belize at this time?
Well, like Trevor is saying, William, we currently in Belize are doing more of the voice work. So we're doing a lot of customer service, a lot of sales, even some financial work. But yesterday at the summit, one of the companies there was talking about how they're doing even medical transcription. And so their employees are actually nurses, biology majors, and even a doctor they said they had on staff. And so these individuals are doing work for US hospitals and clinics. Now I like to use the example in Belize, in order for us to maintain value added and do more value added work. For example, we could attract a company like Dell or Google, right? And then like Trevor is saying, that in Belize you could actually work for Google without actually being in the US. It's just that we need to develop the talent, continue to develop our IT skill sets, and then Google will take notice. Intel recently outsourced to Costa Rica, and so there are examples in the region of major US brands and technology companies, and that's what this project seeks to do, is to see how we can bring more value-added work, more Tier 1 tech support, Tier 2 tech support into Belize. Right.
Now, I know one of the things we saw in the news was that you have about 2,300 people currently employed, and you're looking within a very short period of time to actually double that. Now, when you're talking about value added, it's not going to happen overnight if you're going in that direction. So is there a development plan in place in terms, and is that what the summit sought to do, to see what would be the best fit for Belize? Instead of talking about numbers, for example, is it more to decide to go in a particular direction, or to have it as a hybrid of sorts, to have both the lower end and also at the same time develop the value-added products as well?
Sure. Maybe, Estella, do you want to comment on the deliverables?
Yeah, well, sure. So this project had like three main components. One was to develop an outsourcing strategy that talks directly about the issues that you've just raised. And what we have done is look at the demand, look at what the market, what's happening in the market, mainly the US, but other developed countries as well. We've looked at the supply conditions and supply capacity within Belize, and this is where the numbers that you have just mentioned come in. We've looked at the policies and the legal environment in Belize, and we've come out with about, let's say, it sounds a lot, but about 10 things that need to be done over a period of, like between 1 and 5 years. So there are some priorities that we have suggested should be started immediately. Others could be considered in the medium term, and others which would come in the long term. So the purpose of this is really to create the conditions that would support growth and expansion of the sector. These are issues that would help current investors. For example, one of the things that we have suggested is that the telecom costs still need to come down. So if this happens, then the existing investors would benefit in terms of reducing their costs. But we've also said that government needs to consider doing things like setting up a tech park, a business park, a plug-and-play facility where new entrants could come in and have facilities that they could use to grow their sector. So it's a blend of different things, and we have, as I said, about 10 of them which we discussed yesterday. One of the things that we're trying to do is to get a sense from the stakeholders what they consider as top priority, so that we can stage the implementation in like short, medium, and long term.
Now,
No, I'm just going to say, this is my third trip now to Belize, working on this project. I've been hugely impressed with Belize as a country, with the BPO sector that I've encountered here, but mostly with the potential. I really wish this program could go out on CNN because to make a pitch directly to many US companies, look, here is a place that can answer your calls in English with a cultural affinity that's very close to your customers in the United States and at a very competitive price. It's a huge opportunity, and I'm convinced totally that Belize has got a lot of future BPO success ahead of it.
what has been the main limitation, given the fact that you speak about all of those factors that would definitely make Belize attractive to U.S. companies, for example? What are the limitations that Belize itself needs to overcome to make it more attractive?
I think it's really getting the message out there into the market, particularly into the US market. Obviously, Belize has got limited resources in terms of marketing and targeting investors in the US, but it's building up on that and it's increasing its capacity to do that. And the more that people like Hero and his team can get that message out there into the US, the more business is going to come to the BPO operators in Belize and even possibly some new entrants into the market.
Now, one of the things we've spoken for quite some time in Belize with the disconnect between the educational sector and the skills that are necessary. Very often when you have young people entering these kinds of what they may see as very rigid environments, your retention rates suffer considerably because they're not necessarily prepared to handle the stress levels. So how do you deal with that in terms of building the human resource component of it to make sure that at least, even if it's a temporary thing where they see themselves as a foray or as a stepping stone into something else, that the retention rate does not become a major issue?
I mean, I think the worldwide attrition rate is a major factor in BPO operations, but it's very closely connected with the level of value added. And if you have applications which are higher value added, more interesting, engaging for the staff working there, then that has a very positive effect on the attrition rate. And obviously working in any kind of BPO environment requires discipline, and it's something that people coming into the industry have to acquire, but it doesn't have to be rigid to the point in which it's off-putting. It's a question of being engaged as a team. I mean, BPO is very much a team approach, and one of the things that has been found very positive in other parts of the world is recruiting people who are older, particularly married women returning to the workforce, who have got life experience and can inject maturity and solidity into a team of younger people. And again, that's happening more and more in Belize. So there's no one simple solution to it, but it does come down to people looking at this as a long-term career and engaging with the industry rather than something that they suffer for a few months, because it really doesn't have to be like that.
And I mean, we took to the streets yesterday at the summit, and we kind of interviewed the agents. Throughout the centers, there are over 23 in Belize, and so when we saw what the agents had to say and the employees, some of them have been with the centers, they say 7 years, 11 years, and like, wow, okay, this is excellent. And many of them said that without the BPO sector, they would not have had an entry into the job market. And so, like I mentioned yesterday as well at the summit, is that it is oftentimes a stepping stone, and that is okay, because as you have people entering the industry, you have more graduates coming out of the high school system, you have more graduates coming out of the junior colleges, and so yes, it does add to a little bit of the training costs, but like Trevor is saying, that keeping more of the mature staff there to lead the younger ones that come on as the first employment that they ever have in Belize is critical. And so that is what we've seen as well, is that they would, you know, again, it would be the first type of employment that they ever have, and it builds their resumes at the end of the day. So that's always positive, right?
Now, we were talking obviously about the young people who may enter into these kind of jobs. But we also know that you've had failures in terms of businesses that have set up in this particular field. Is that something that you track as well? And to see why they are failing, and how do you create, I guess, I don't want to say regulations, but how do you help them to actually survive, especially when you have young people who may have a strong sense of entrepreneurial spirit and would like to say, okay, this is something that I can see myself going, because I know you've had some young people in Ladyville, for example, who took it on. I don't know the status of where they are, but is that something that is also being covered under the development plan, to see if young people who are coming together can actually use this as an opportunity for them to actually establish their own businesses in country as well?
Definitely, William. And as you can see, actually, it's interesting, because in terms of comparing foreign direct investment compared to local entrepreneurs, that's what we've seen happening more and more in Belize. And so a lot of the newer BPOs that have come up have been local entrepreneurs that have set up their BPOs and employed Belizeans. Now, one of the critical success factors is to ensure that you conduct proper due diligence on any client or contract that you want to sign. And so you make reference to, again, some failures that have happened, and the centers can tell you, the ones that have established, is that they've all interacted with a client or two that has, you know, been either a client that hasn't been truthful or etc. But Beltraide, really, we wouldn't go in and do due diligence for any company. It's up to the company before they sign to read the fine print. And so that is really the key there. And again, I often advise my anyone that needs the advice to seek consultation, consult the industry, consult the players that have been there, and then to go forward with that.
A lot of it too comes down to the ability of companies to market themselves, particularly in the US market, because the poorer, the more risky contracts are the ones that are easier to achieve. The better contracts, the ones that add more value and that are more solid, are the ones that you really have to go out there into the market and strongly compete for. So the more the companies in Belize do that, then the better contracts they will have.
Now, as you look at the opportunities that exist globally, and you are competing on a global scale, so you spoke about some of the advantages that Belize may, for example, face. But how is it more a marketing thing at this point in terms of globally, because you're competing to try and distinguish or build a brand, especially when you're talking about 23 different companies in a small place like Belize? How do you build, for example, a Belize brand to say these are the tenets of what can be achieved if you choose Belize, when it may be so divergent within the industry itself?
A story I told at the summit yesterday in the UK some few years ago, I saw an advert from a major UK retail bank that said, "Your call answered in the UK." Because there's been growing customer resistance in the UK to calls being answered in some parts of the world. The brand of Belize is that it doesn't have that. The attributes, the benefits of the Belize brand is that we think like you, we speak like you, we understand you, and more to the point, you will feel comfortable in working with us if you're a US customer. Added to that, the fact that a high proportion of people in Belize also speak Spanish. There's a natural target market there for the southern, southwestern US, mainly English speaking, but with a significant Spanish speaking population as well. I think it is such a natural brand attribute that I am totally convinced this is going to work.
Now, in terms of, especially when we're talking about, that was shocking for me. I didn't know it was as many as 2,300 people employed. And when you're talking about doubling that, how can you manage that to make it sustainable and at the same time go in the direction that you want it to go to be a more high level? How robust does the development plan has to be, and how do you get buy-in from the industry players themselves?
This is not a zero-sum game. Doubling the number of people currently employed in BPO does not mean necessarily reducing standards. It can mean, for example, attracting into the industry people who are currently working in other sectors, maybe even people who are currently working for government, but people who have got the kind of skills that are usable in BPO. I will assure you that BPO in Belize is still a long way short of what is normally regarded as saturation levels in other places, which is anywhere between 5 and 10% of the total workforce. BPO employment in Belize is well below that, and there is a lot of opportunity for BPO in Belize to attract further people into the sector.
Now, go ahead.
Sorry, I think another important thing to consider is the signaling that's coming from the private sector. Some of them are already increasing the seats, they're already increasing their capacity. This is a reflection of the potential market that they know that they can acquire with the current levels of staff, with the current market contacts that they have. I mean, with or without the development plan, they are already expanding their facilities. I think this is a good signal for us to follow, because they have their nose, they have their ear to the ground, so they know what's out there. And I think this is another very interesting thing that came out yesterday. I mean, we didn't get any BPO people saying our projections were way out, or we couldn't achieve this or the other. They're already doing it with their own resources at the moment.
Now, one of the questions that still begs asking for me is, Trevor spoke about attracting people who are already employed. And that, for me, is there's still not necessarily, I wouldn't say a stigma, but people don't fully understand BPO and the potential that it has, or where you can go. For some people, it's seen as, okay, I couldn't find anything else, I go in there because it's just to answer calls all day. So how do you get people to actually start looking at the opportunities that exist, especially if you still have that very narrow definition? And that's one of the reasons why I asked to define it, because for most people, they say it's a call center. You know, I don't want to spend my entire day answering calls, you know, especially from developed countries where people can be sometimes very difficult to manage. And my own success is dependent on the whims of somebody, whether they click with you or they don't.
Well, I would say look at what's happened in the past elsewhere. I come from Ireland. Ireland is now one of the leading financial services centres in Europe, and it started with simple operations on the west coast of Ireland, processing insurance claims for US insurance companies overnight. Very simple, pretty much low value added work. That's where it started, but it ended up with major developments in Dublin, handling funds administration, derivatives and the like. Now, that didn't happen overnight. That took a growth plan of 20 years. But it can happen, and I believe it will happen for Belize. So even if some of the existing work is low value added, that is going to change. So I would say to any young person watching this, get on board now at the ground level. It will go up.
And sorry, to add to that, William, as well, like I mentioned, there are other parts and other areas of outsourcing, like we mentioned, that we are working to attract to Belize and continue to develop. So there's even the example I like to use of legal process outsourcing. I mean, you spoke about you can have even a team of attorneys do work in for other common law countries in Belize. And then there's also what we call the knowledge process outsourcing area that is very high level, that looks at market analytics, business intelligence. So someone that, you know, is an economics expert can, you know, take that and then hire a group of economics experts and do research and development, etc. So there are different forms of outsourcing, and again, like Trevor is mentioning, Belize is really at that brink of just the icing on the cake, basically, right?
So how do we get people? For example, one of the things that stuck with me from the discussion so far has been almost like a second career, a kind of trajectory for people. You do have people retiring at 55 with, you know, in a country like Belize, and we know now 55. No, and you know, and I think that's one of the areas that we have not looked at. We have looked at it for young people entering, but we've not looked at for a second career kind of option. How much of what are the challenges there in terms of attracting people who are looking for second career opportunities? And is it something that is even on the radar in Belize?
I think it increasingly will be. I mean, the old model where people work until they're 60, 65 and then go and sit quietly in a room and vegetate, that's gone. People at all ages now look for fresh challenges, and I think that's the secret of it, really. It's not so much for, if you have a person who has finished one job at the age of 60, 65, it's not the money necessarily, it's what challenge can this, you know, put afresh into my life that's going to make me get up in the morning and be switched on and do it. And you know, we've seen it in the UK, in the US, in Europe, elsewhere, people doing second careers, third careers, maybe not as common at this point in Belize, but again, it will happen.
All right. Well, final words in terms of coming out of the summit. What would you say are the major things that emerged?
Sure. So, like we mentioned, the two key areas were to develop the strategy with key priority areas, and again, looking at how we can do continued value-added work in Belize, as well as develop the standards framework. Coming out of the summit, the energy yesterday was excellent, and I think Estella and Trevor can agree with me that there is a coming together of a lot of the owners and CEOs of these centers to kind of create an association to begin to work on a lot of the priorities that they have identified, along with Beltraide and our team here, right? And so, apart from the work that we do in investment generation and small business development, export development, we are also going to be working with this industry closely to continue its development, right?
Yeah.
Well, this has been a very interesting conversation, and of course we wish continued success as you work on the strategy for the sector. Thank you to our visitors.
I gotta say, I've worked in many parts of the world. This is one that's been the most fun.
Thank you, Trevor.
Well, that's good to know. So we'll see you around more, right, Trevor?
I hope so.
Estella, thank you as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, William.
We're going to go ahead and take a break, and when we come back, it will be to talk about the Love Revolution concert. If you want to find out more, don't switch. Just stay right here with us at Open Your Eyes. We'll be right back.